Well, it has been nearly 2 months now that we have been asked to shelter in place since we have become keenly aware of the coronavirus pandemic and its implications. And so I thought that I might just take us to the book of Jeremiah today, to chapter 12 and verse 5. This may seem a little strange, but listen in here. If you have raced with men on foot, and they have wearied you, how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land you are so trusting, what will you do in the thicket of the Jordan? Well, as I've just mentioned, we are now 2 months into the coronavirus pandemic and its consequences. And we have been shut down from worshiping for about 2 months. And we have been told to shelter at home by directives of the governor. And in some cases, the directives have included things that just don't seem to quite stack up with the science. As a matter of fact, it seems like the science seems to keep changing from day to day. Where one time we're told, go ahead and fellowship with people. Next time we're told to keep social distancing of 6 feet. Next time we're told, don't need to wear masks. And then we're told to wear masks. We've been told that the coronavirus can live up to 2 hours on hard surfaces. And then it comes out today, it's very difficult for the coronavirus to be transmitted from hard surfaces. So we find ourselves confused, and in the midst of all this, we're just tired, we're weary, and we may have some questions as a result. We're even concerned because for some, they may not have the ability to provide for their families. And then we even wonder if this thing continues to go on, whether or not we can recover economically and whether or not we are moving into a long depression or a recession or even a depression. And we may even be wondering what the motives of our elected officials might well be. And all of this causes us to be unsettled at the least. And from time to time, we just can't help but worry about what's going on around us. And so like Jeremiah, when he heard that there was a plot against his life, we become duplicitous. What do I mean by that? Well, look at verses 1 and 2 here of Jeremiah 12. Jeremiah says, "Righteous are you, O Lord, when I plead with you. Yet let me talk to you about your judgments. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why are those happy who dwell in treachery? You have planted them. Yes, they have taken root. They grow. Yes, they bear fruit. You are near in their mouth, but far from their mind." And so what he starts off by saying is the very thing that you and I as believers would say, is that God is righteous. God is just, and God is in control. God is sovereign in all his ways. But then we turn around, just like Jeremiah does, and we're tempted to say, but let me sit down with you and let's talk about your judgments. Let's talk about what you're really doing here. And like Jeremiah, we begin to question the judgment of God. We begin to question what he is up to. We begin to question whether or not he's even being just or unjust. Here in Jeremiah, he talked about that. He says, "Why are those happy who deal so treacherously? Or why does the way of the wicked prosper?" And so we begin to wonder whether or not God is being just. And specifically, Jeremiah wanted to know why the way of the wicked seemed to prosper if God was indeed angry with their sin. And we see that in verses 1 and 2. In fact, it seems that to Jeremiah as if God himself had planted them because they had taken root and were bearing fruit materially. He says, you have planted them, and they're prospering, they're taking root in our midst. You see that in verse 2. You have planted them. Yes, they have taken root. They grow. Yes, they bear fruit. And then on top of that, for the prophet Jeremiah, he says, not only that, they're hypocrites. The latter part of verse 2, that you are near in their mouth, but far from their minds. In other words, they're hypocrites. And Jeremiah asked God to judge them, judge these unrighteous people. He had hoped God would drag them off like sheep to be butchered, in verse 3. Pull them out like sheep for their slaughter, and prepare them for the day of slaughter. The point simply is that Jeremiah, in his questioning, in his weakness, in his depression, in finding out that there was a plot to kill him, thought he had a good case before God. And was he ever surprised by God's response, found in verse 5? Let me read it to you again. If you have raced with men on foot, and they have wearied you, how will you compete with horses? And if in a safe land you are trusting, what will you do in the thicket of the Jordan? So the question that God is asking Jeremiah is, all right, if you fought these battles already up to this point, how is it that you'll be able to, and you are wearied by doing that, how then will you ever be able to run with horses? That's a good question. Can you and I run with the horses? Or are we still struggling with what we find ourselves in today? You see, Jeremiah knew that God was purposing everything in his life. And that's why God says, if you weary while running with men, how will you run with horses? Jeremiah knew God sovereignly governed his life, and that he sovereignly governed the universe. He knew and trusted the providence of God, and yet in his flesh, he finds himself questioning God. And so we too may find ourselves in that same place. And what we fail to understand is those who have come before us, who went through the pandemic of 1912 or World War I and World War II, suffered much more greatly than you and I are suffering today. And what we fail to realize is that God is purposing in yours and my life. And what he was telling Jeremiah is if you think this is tough, there can be worse things yet to come. How will you handle them? Will you trust me then? Hey, listen, this pandemic may not be fun, and it will cost lives, and it will be inconvenient and difficult from time to time. And we are all living through this. It's a worldwide thing. Can I ask you the question? If during this time, when we walk or run with men, will we be ready to run with horses, to run with something that might even be worse in our lives down the road. And so God is trying to get across to Jeremiah, as he is with us, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord, to them that are called according to his purposes. For whom he did foreknow, he did predestinate to be conformed to the image of Christ. God, through the fixes in our lives, is doing a greater work of grace in you and me. Let us learn to run with men and not weary, so that in the future, if need be, we can run with the horses.